This episode is brought to you by Google. Now, if you ran a small business, what would you do with an extra 3 weeks a year? That's how much time the average small business could save with AI, according to Google's latest AI Works report. 3 weeks isn't spare time, it's the ability to get the day-to-day done faster, giving you time to plan for the future. So why aren't more people using AI? Google's research found it's mainly a lack of training and confidence. That's why they launched AI Works, a people-first training pilot that helps small business workers understand how they can use AI tools like Google Gemini to do more. In a matter of hours, people were using AI as a super assistant, instantly unlocking productivity gains. They were using it to write documents, crunch numbers, brainstorm, and even role-play new business ideas. If every SME in the UK gained those 3 weeks, that's a serious lift to job satisfaction, innovation, and national productivity. Just one example of how Google's AI is fueling growth and transformation. Find out more at google.com/AI Works. Hello and welcome to The Rest is Money with me, Steph McGovern.
And with me, Robert Peston. Now, we've got an absolute ton of stuff to get through. I'm going to be looking later in the programme at the 30 billion black hole that the Chancellor faces for her budget, the 30 billion she's going to have to raise in taxes, why there's that black hole and who's to blame. You've been digging into this very significant apparent AI investment in the Northeast, haven't you?
Yeah, there's a lot of excitement in the Northeast after Trump's visit, this tech deal that's been agreed between the US and the UK. So I want to talk about that and, you know, what the realities are when it comes to us becoming an AI superpower, which is what the boss of Microsoft said about us recently. So yeah, I want to talk about that.
But first of all, I want to start by examining the catastrophe of the cyber attack on Jaguar Land Rover. This is the worst cyber attack, in my estimate, on any British company to date. There's been no production at Jaguar Land Rover since the end of August. Their systems have been absolutely decimated. It's had huge knock-ons for their suppliers. Tens of thousands of jobs in manufacturing and added value manufacturing. These are high quality jobs at risk. So this is a major problem.
I mean, yeah, and just to put it in context, do you remember we did quite a lot of talking about the cyber attack at Marks and Spencer's and how that had really impacted the supply chain? You know, there were empty shelves, the cost was in the millions. This is much bigger than that, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we've already seen in data about how businesses are feeling about the outlook, that this is having an economically significant negative impact. The so-called PMIs, which measure underlying economic conditions, the PMI for manufacturing has fallen, and a significant element of that fall is to do with the real blow to manufacturing in the automotive industry as a result of this attack on JLR. And as I say, not just at JLR, which obviously puts the cars together and designs them, but also among really important suppliers, particularly in the Midlands.
Just to give you a figure on what this is costing, it's estimated that JLR alone losing £50 million a week in costs because of this attack from the stoppage. So, and you know, that's just them. And as you rightly say, there's a huge supply chain behind them who are being impacted by this too. I
mean, I was struck by a letter that Zara Sultana, who used to be a Labour MP and is currently struggling to create a new party with Jeremy Corbyn, but you know, she is still an MP, and she pointed out that in her constituency there is a business called EvTech, and she points out that at EvTech Automotive, an important supplier to JLO, it's had no sales revenue, no payments received from JLR, severely compromised cash flow, and has been left with the majority of its workforce sent home until further notice. And this is just one supplier among many. And just, I suppose, to give you a sense of the scale, JLR last year made profits of £2.5 billion before tax. It's a big business in UK terms. Given that it is intrinsically very profitable, the government, I think, is struggling with the idea that JLR itself should be bailed out. There's got to be an element of caveat emptor when it comes to putting in place protections against these kinds of cyber attacks. But there's obviously a different issue about how to help the other victims, right? Now, look, it may be that the government will feel under pressure at some point to provide support directly to JLR. But in the first instance, it is the thousands and thousands and thousands of high-skilled jobs at the suppliers that the government has to think about.
So in terms of numbers of people we're talking about here, so JLR itself directly employs about 30,000 people, but then in the supply chain, it's 100,000 people who are working in the supply chain for Jaguar Land Rover. And then on top of that, you've got about another 60,000 people who rely on the spending of these workers. So this is like, it extends way beyond just one plant, one company, one business being saved. This is about, thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands.
And the worry, obviously, is were these employees sent home for an extended period? Were they sacked? And some of them who will be on short-term contracts obviously face the risk of that. Skills can be lost. Vital skills and capacity can be lost forever, right? And, this is an unusual part of, Britain's manufacturing economy, which is world-class and world-leading. And we don't have enough high-value manufacturing that is world-class and world-leading. So there's an enormous amount at stake. I was struck by remarks made by the chair of the House of Commons Business and Industry Committee, Liam Byrne, Labour MP. He was arguing that what ought to happen here is that the government should take off the shelf some of the supports that it used during COVID. So furlough schemes, paying some of these employees to stay on. This is the government, the taxpayer, essentially paying the wages of these employees while they're not working. Loans of various sorts to these companies to cover their missing cash flows. Now, my understanding is that the government is not going down that route, partly because it doesn't want to have a situation where these people stop working for a period, because I mean, as I understand it, talking to sources in government, they are worried that even temporary cessation of work means that these people's skills, they might not be lost, but they, won't be quite as sharp as they were when they get back to work. And one of the problems is we don't actually 100% know when they're going to get back to work. Jaguar Land Rover, as we're speaking, has said that definitely systems not going to be back in place until next month. But it doesn't sound as though they're even confident that the systems will be back and running by next month and that they'll be able to resume production. So the thing that the government, as I understand, is looking at, does seem to me, I'd be interested to know what you think, but this does seem to me quite smart, is that the government would take the view that this is production that has been delayed rather than lost permanently. I mean, if you take the view that underlying demand for Jaguar Land Rover's automobiles is still going to be there when they start making again, then with any luck, this is not permanently lost output. Now, Jaguar Land Rover itself doesn't have working systems, even if it wanted to place orders. So what the government, I think, may well end up doing is to make an assessment of the parts that Jaguar Land Rover would need as and when it starts manufacturing again. And the government will then place the orders themselves, buy the parts from the suppliers, and then expect Jaguar Land Rover, when it's operating again, to then repurchase all of that stuff from the government, so the government would get its money back. And this does sound quite creative to me. There is one quite major, though, problem here, which is because we live in a lean manufacturing world where parts are not warehoused or stockpiled anywhere. The thing that's slightly worrying the government at the moment is it's going to buy all this stuff, but it doesn't actually know where to put it.
Yeah, well, I think just a couple of things for me on it. The government's going to take a hit no matter what, isn't it? So it's whether that's the furlough scheme, which you suggest is probably not going to happen. People are going to end up needing welfare, aren't they? So if they lose their jobs or if they're, struggling for money, they're going to either cost the government in terms of furlough or welfare or loans, or, as you say, buying these products. And you're right, when we had the pandemic happen, we lost a lot of skills in the construction sector because people then thought about what else they want to do with their lives. I disagree that you can't go back into a job if you've been off for a while from it and still be as skilled, because that would mean every woman who's ever had a baby and taken maternity leave
That's a very
would be
good
raging
point.
to think that they couldn't go back and be as skilled as they were. The furlough, though, I think is, again, that would stop that probably would help to keep them in the sector, though, because hopefully, some are going to think, sack it, this is a good point to think about doing something else. But there'll also be a lot of people who think, right, we know we're going to get our job back. At least we've got some money to keep us going for now.
But it is better to get them back into the workplace.
Of course it is. Of course it is.
I mean, because at the moment they're sitting at home anyway. But I mean, surely this idea of the government basically being the purchaser of last resort, buying the parts, that's a good idea, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. But the problem is you're then relying on the people who would normally buy their Jaguar Land Rover cars still wanting to buy them, but waiting for them for longer. So if you need a car and you normally buy a Jaguar, you're not going to go, we'll wait another year. You might go, right, this is a point to try an Audi, or this is a point to try BMW, or whatever it is. You're kind of assuming that people are going to wait as well. And you're right about the lean production stuff. That's where I started my life in a factory, and everything was about this just-in-time lean production. You do not want things sitting on a production line because you haven't got space for it, waiting for the next bit. It is all, we pride ourselves on our productivity in plants like car manufacturers. And someone like Jaguar Land Rover, I know you've been to the plant, I've been to the plants before. They're incredibly slick operations. You've got like 1,000 cars a day being produced across these plants.
Yeah, they're mind-boggling. I mean, this vast space. And you see these cars gradually getting another bit bolted on and then another, and a lot of it's automated. It's a very impressive operation.
And time is key. So, that can really kill a sector, time, particularly manufacturing. So you're right, these are all, but I think fundamentally the government's going to take a hit, and it is good that they're being more creative about it, and maybe they buy stuff off the supply chain and then where they put it. Or here's another idea. What about in the time these people are being furloughed, we do training for them in AI? Because eventually, some of their jobs are probably going to be replaced by automation or AI. So what about giving them some reskilling? What about, using the further education sector at this point to provide skills in other areas? And in that time, we prepare them for the next bit of their lives. I mean, some of them might not want to do that. I appreciate it, but that could be another idea. Have a go at something else while we wait for Jaguar Land Rover to get sorted.
It's patently the case, not only that British businesses don't have adequate defences against these kinds of cyber attacks, and it's now a matter, I would say, of national emergency for every business to reassess what kind of protections it has. But we also don't have an adequate insurance scheme. Right. So as you probably know, there is an insurance scheme that is government backed for straightforward terrorist attacks on buildings. It's called Pool Re. And it's largely private sector funded, but there's a part of the insurance that gets a government guarantee. And there's inadequate. When I talk to businesses, they can't get proper insurance protection against this kind of cyber attack. And that's a huge flaw and a huge vulnerability for British businesses. So I would say, as a matter of urgency, the government needs to get involved in trying to create an insurance scheme, which would be partly funded by the private sector, largely funded by the private sector, but with the so-called tail risk picked up by the government. Because we can't be in a situation where so many important jobs are at risk, and that essentially bad actors can destroy an important sector of the economy and jobs. So, it's partly we've got to put in place better technological protections against these risks, but partly there's got to be a better insurance scheme. So I suppose just one final point. You may have heard the Chancellor in a recent interview, actually with my ITV colleague, Joel Hills, talking about how Russia was very much involved in these attacks. That was picked up as her saying that Russia was behind the attack on JLR. Just to be clear, I've talked to very well-placed sources on this. They don't know that this is Russia in this case. They assume, because it was so deadly, that there's probably a state involved in it, some kind of enemy of the UK, but they don't even know that. They don't know for sure that this is not actually just a bunch of crooks with no state help at all. So at the moment, we don't know that it's Russia, and we don't know if there's any state involvement in this attack.
Yeah, because like the M&S one, that wasn't connected to a state, was it? It was this hacking group that basically blackmail people and are doing it to lots of different companies. So, and you're right, it's scary to think they have that power and there isn't the insurance to fight against it.
Now let's move on. You've got, I hope, a bit of more optimistic news, or am I wrong?
Yes, so there's a lot of excitement in the Northeast after Trump visited, because there's been a lot of fuss made about how Britain and particularly the Northeast are going to become this AI superpower. So you've had like the boss of NVIDIA talking about it, Microsoft, OpenAI, all talking about this big deal they want to do. And off the back of it, there's now lots of, I guess, optimism around the jobs that could be created and also the investment that could come into the area. Now, I've been looking at this because obviously it could be a huge deal for the area where I live. And we've got the Secretary of State for Science and Technology up here at the minute, kind of pushing all of this. So Liz Kendall, I mean, it was Peter Kyle, but as you know, got replaced in that reshuffle. And there's two elements that I want to talk about here, because I'd be really interested as well to know what you think on whether this is going to work or not. So what big part of it for the North is it becoming an AI growth zone. So they're going to create in a business park, not far from where I am now, Cobalt Business Park. They're going to create there this AI growth zone. And this is going to be connected to this massive data centre that I've talked to you before that's being built in Blythe. So Blackstone announced a year ago they were investing 10 billion to create a data centre on the site of a former power station that's been closed since 2000. It was going to be a car battery plant that got the kibosh, and then it got announced last year it's going to be this AI data centre creating 4,000 jobs. So that's one part of this excitement, is we're now going to have this growth zone where hopefully businesses will then cluster connected to AI. And the Chancellor of Newcastle University has come out and talked about how excited they are about this. I was talking to the Mayor, the North East Mayor, Kim McGuinness, about it. She said already they're getting loads of inquiries from firms who now want to establish themselves in the North East as part of this kind of clustering effect. The other big part of it, which is connected to the US and to Trump and to NVIDIA and OpenAI, is this Stargate UK. So this is a partnership between NVIDIA, OpenAI and a British company called Nscale. And what they want to do is build AI infrastructure in the UK so that we have our own computability. Now, looking at this, that sounds great. You know, building this supercomputer, building these data centers. And if you look at the companies behind it, so we know all about OpenAI and everything they're doing with ChatGPT and leading the way on how we use artificial intelligence. NVIDIA, of course, is the big, successful trillion-dollar company, which is...
I mean, NVIDIA, biggest company in the world. I mean, multi-trillion-dollar.
Yeah, exactly. So got a lot of power and a lot of money. So they are investing 500 million into this Stargate UK. And Nscale, this British company, which was set up about 21 months ago by an Australian guy, listed in the UK. They say that they build AI data centers powered by renewable energy. That's how they sell themselves. And, you know, sounds like a really exciting business, getting all this money and happy days. It's British and all of that. But interestingly, they haven't yet opened an AI data center. So they, and I've got questions about the funding. So they've helped expand one in Norway, but as yet they haven't built one from scratch. Now, I'm not saying they can't, because the whole point of a startup, you know, and supporting these businesses is because you don't necessarily have to prove you've done it before in order to be able to do it well. But my question on all of this is, they're getting 500 million from NVIDIA, but they're going to need billions in order to deliver on these data centers. And they're going to need to buy loads of NVIDIA chips, by the way, which is another interesting point to this story, because NVIDIA are doing this really interesting thing at the minute of putting loads of money into the companies which essentially are going to buy all these chips from them, worth a lot more than the money they're putting in the first place.
I mean, NVIDIA are making an absolutely massive investment in OpenAI, as you know.
Yeah, $100 billion into OpenAI to take, you know, this significant stake in them. So there's a question about where is Nscale going to get this money from in order to then deliver on these data centers. What I worry about is what we've seen also just up the road in Sunderland, is where they, you'll remember I talked about this on the podcast about a year ago, this excitement around Crownworks Studios. So these huge TV studios, which could make massive films and TV production, backed by Fulwell, which is the production company owned by James Corden, amongst other people. And they had this private equity investment in order to be able to deliver it. That got pulled. And now it's in a really precarious position where nobody knows what's happening. And again, I hate to be the pessimist on this, but without that additional private investment, my worry is, how is this going to actually be delivered? And also, you know, this is before we talk about the energy, the cheap energy that's going to be needed to run these data centers, the water that's going to be needed for cooling and things like that, all the skills that are needed. Now, talking to, for example, Kim McGuinness, they're saying 5,000 jobs created here. But then what are those jobs? Because a lot of them are they not going to be, to begin with, they're going to be construction. We need the skills there. And, you know, we're also planning to build 1.5 million homes in this parliament. So there's a lot of work to be done on getting the construction skills gap filled. And again, I'm not saying we can't do it, but where's the plans around that? That's what I want to see.
So you're saying is 20 billion is a cost, but we don't know where the money's coming from. Is that what you're saying?
The government is saying overall, this partnership could generate more than 5,000 jobs and generate up to 30 billion in private investment.
So when you hear any minister say, it could generate up to 30 billion of investment, what that means, dear listener, is they haven't got the money yet.
Exactly. And 10 billion, yes, coming from Blackstone. They've committed to that.
I'm genuinely shocked here because you spend your life accusing me of being a bit Eeyore-ish and pessimistic. But this is you. This is you. You're bringing me down, which you're not supposed to do. You're supposed to be the one who says, my God, this is an incredibly exciting investment.
Because, and the reason why, and this links to Farage actually, the reason why I feel pessimistic about it is because I want to see where the money's coming from, and then I'll get more excited about it. And the commitment to driving skills and things, I still can't see like a proper plan there. We keep being told skills are coming and a plan for skills. I don't think we're there yet on that. And you know what? The people behind all of this are quite a few people I know well and like Kim McGuinness, the North East Mayor, who's doing amazing things for the area, or Jackie Smith, who's the Skills Minister. But I think there's a lot of groundwork to be done yet before I can get excited about it. If this does come off, which I really hope it does, there is also the ripple effect here, which is really significant. So, for example, Hartlepool, just up the road, there's an agreement that's been made with Centrica, obviously one of our largest energy suppliers, to pair up with a firm in the States called X Energy to develop these advanced modular reactors in Hartlepool. So I was talking about where's the power going to come from all of this. They reckon that could create up to 2,500 jobs, because these reactors are going to be built next to Hartlepool Power Station, which is obviously nearing the end of its life. So there is excitement to be had around the potential here. I just want to see the money.
Show us the money. No, very briefly, because we need to get on to Reeves's black hole in a second, but just very briefly, you were saying this takes you on to Farage. What did you mean by that?
Because what I am seeing here at the moment in the Northeast and across the North, and I know it's people are telling me they're seeing it everywhere, is people are really unhappy and feel a great sense of injustice and the need to fight back. And, we're seeing the flags, particularly here where I live, are in the most deprived parts of the city and the area, across Durham, across Newcastle. There's a real sense from what people are saying to me, and people are really angry that they want their lives to feel a bit better, whether it's taxi drivers who are always the mouthy ones, but, taxi drivers, but also small business owners and bus drivers and NHS workers. Everyone keeps talking to me about how terrible the country is, how hard their lives are, how things don't feel like they're improving. And I think that's why I really want these big investment projects to work, so people do genuinely feel like their lives are getting better, because the tension is really palpable at the moment. Like, I know this sounds really dramatic, but from what I'm seeing, it feels like we're on the verge of some type of civil war between people. And what Farage has done so well is give really clear messaging about why their lives are terrible, whether it's right or wrong. It's irrelevant. It's the fact that he's just doing this really clear messaging which plays to people's unease, and he's talking about how he can make it better for them. So when he throws out these figures, like he reckons he can save the economy over £200 billion by stopping anyone using the welfare system that isn't a UK citizen, that's really clear messaging, like that flipping bus in Brexit, which I can understand why people here are like, right, well, let's give them a chance, because so far things have not improved.
And just to be clear, even though pretty much all the experts say there is no substance to the numbers that Farage and his colleagues are throwing out in terms of welfare savings from ending indefinite late rights or severely restricting those who have indefinite leave to remain in the UK. Do you think that round your way people pick up the scepticism that the savings will turn out to be real, or do they just hear Nigel Farage and think, I want a bit of that?
Nigel Farage is louder and clearer. He's really good at delivering a very simple message. And therefore, and because, the people I'm talking about are not stupid. Like, I was with my friends last night. We were talking about all of our families now wearing like Union Jack pin badges and flags up outside the houses. And we were saying, what is that all about? And it is the clear messaging of our lives have not got any better. Farage is saying he can make them better. No one as yet has stood up and said, it feels like to them, no one stood up and said, that's wrong, his numbers are wrong, in any clear, understandable, defensible way that feels like you can go, all right, okay, so what is it then? So if you are saying Farage is wrong, what is it that is right, and what is going to make my life better? And it needs not to be incremental little changes. It needs to be big and bold, and that's what Farage is doing. He's going, right, reset, total reset rather than, oh, we're going to do a bit of thinging here and a little bit of this here. So and I'm not saying either is wrong or right, but that's what's making the difference to how people think about their lives.
Look, we've got to come back to this because it's a huge subject, but I'm just going to put one very quick question to you. I was talking to a very, very senior member of the government only a couple of days ago, and this person was saying they understand that when they make their criticisms of Farage, it's not particularly cutting through at the moment, but they do believe that when it comes to a general election, which is still 3.5 years away, at that point, voters will invest in trying to understand whether his sums add up, for example. I mean, I said to this minister, I'm not 100% sure you're right. I think there is such an appetite for change among many people that actually they are simply taking the view that many of them took during Brexit, which is, okay, there are risks, but I'm prepared to take the risk. And you know, that they are so mistrustful of so-called experts that actually the normal political arguments that a Labour or a Tory might make, would typically make against a reform and a Farage, may well not cut through. Do you think this is new politics where traditional analytical demolition of a set of policies just doesn't work?
Yes, because let's take, for example, what we're about to go on to, which is the budget deficit, about how much, you know, how big Rachel Reeves' black hole is. This time last year, you and I were interviewing Rachel Reeves and she said, yes, I'm bringing in £40 billion worth of tax rises, but this will be the last time I come to you for big tax rises. We're now looking at, from what you found out, £30 billion worth of tax rises a year later. So if you're a voter, if you're trying to decide, how do I figure out whether Farage's numbers add up? Not the Labour's haven't been adding up. And yes, you can say we're going to go on to who's at fault about why the black hole is as big as it is. But if you're a voter, you're just going, well, hang on a minute. They said this and then changed their mind. And so how do you even think about working out who's right or wrong in all of this when you're told one thing and then another thing happens? And you're right, the people want to challenge the status quo like they did in Brexit. Long before the vote, I kept saying everyone in the Northeast wants out of the EU because they think that will give them more power. And that's what people want. They want more control over their lives and they want to feel like their life is getting better. And as things stand, it doesn't feel like it is to them. And that is what is going to dictate Farage becoming Prime Minister if Labour do not do something bold and make people feel better.
So this seems like a good enough moment just to have a temporary pause. See you again in a minute. So let me just break down this 30 billion black hole. And it's got three elements. And I should point out at this stage, the 30 billion, we're still two months away from the budget. The 30 billion is the baseline because it does not include the cost of any additional spending that actually this government may want to make. This is just the hole that events largely beyond its control have forced on the government. So I'll just give you an example. Obviously, there's an enormous amount of pressure on the government to abolish the two-child limit on universal credit payments. This is seen by many experts and most Labour MPs as the most effective way of reducing particularly child poverty. But, you know, if they do that, and I think there's a very good chance they will do that in the coming months, that's £3.5 billion on top of the 30 billion. Now, just to go through the 30 billion, it has three elements. There is £5 billion from the fact that the interest rate paid by the government is higher than the official forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility, thought would be the case only a few months ago. That 5 billion could swing around between now and the budget because, of course, inflation could rise a bit higher than we expect, and that could lead to the bill on the index-linked element of the government's debts being higher. You could see further falls in the price of government debt, which means that new issues of debt would pay a higher interest rate. So that 5 billion is where we are now, and it could either get bigger or it could get smaller. There's another 5 billion, and this you could absolutely blame the government, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, the former Welfare Secretary for, which is that they had inked in 5 billion of savings from reforms to disability payments. They couldn't get it past their MPs who didn't like the proposals. So that's 5 billion that they've got to find because they're not going to save 5 billion anytime soon from welfare reforms. But the big £20 billion of the 30 billion is because the Office for Budget Responsibility has been reviewing the so-called supply side of the economy, the productive potential of the economy. It had embedded in its forecast particular assumptions about the future rate of productivity growth, and its review of the supply side of the economy means that it is becoming more pessimistic about the outlook for productivity growth. That is output per unit of capital, output per person. It thinks that the UK in the future will be less productive than it thought. That means the economy grows more slowly. That means tax revenues are less than they would be. And that is why there is this 20 billion hole.
So what you're saying, Robert, is that they got their forecast wrong. We're not going to be as productive as we thought we were, which means there's not going to be as much money coming in. And therefore, Rachel Reeves has got less tax revenues, and therefore her hole has got bigger because of it.
The important thing to recognise, I don't think the Tory party will recognise this, or the Reform Party will recognise this, but the economics are, when productivity is lower than you expect, that is the accumulation of, poor government policies and indeed poor private sector decision making going back years and years and years, right? And the main driver of the fact that the Office for Budget Responsibility is having to downgrade, and we should be clear about this, it's downgrading to productivity forecasts that other forecasters, including the Bank of England, have been at for some time. The Bank of England, for example, has been more pessimistic about the productivity outlook than the OBR has been.
So why as a government do we not go on the most pessimistic one? Isn't that the better way to run a country, is to follow the least optimistic view of the economy, because that's the one least likely to get you into trouble later on down the line?
Yes, of course, it is sensible to be cautious. But the system here is that there is an official forecaster, the Office for Budget Responsibility. It is the one that, written into law, in fact, makes the forecasts which determine whether or not the Chancellor is hitting or missing her fiscal forecast. Now, you could say, and this is where judgment comes in, and this is an area where you could criticise certainly the Treasury officials, and therefore probably Rachel Reeves, that a year ago when they were doing the budget, given that there was widespread, people like me were saying, the Office of Budget Responsibility was being too optimistic about productivity. People like Paul Johnson, then running their Institute for Fiscal Studies, were saying that the OBR was being too optimistic. So the way to criticise Rachel Reeves would be to say that even though she has to, under the law, regard the OBR as gospel, she should have built more margin for error into the amount of money she raised, into what's called the headroom that she left herself when it comes to hitting her fiscal targets. Because, as you and I have pointed out, in the last budget, and again in the spring statement, the headroom that she left herself, that's the sort of cushion against things going wrong, was by historic standards very low. It was less than £10 billion, right? Which meant that revenues only had to swing a tiny percentage amount for all of that headroom to be wiped out. Now, in the old days, after the OBR was, set up all those years ago, before the latter stage of Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, most Chancellors had 20, 30 billion pounds of headroom. So in the old days, if you'd had a hit of the sort that she's had of 30 billion, that would have been absorbed by her headroom. The problem that she's got is she took a big gamble that the swing in the economy wasn't going to be that great. And she left herself a margin of error of just this 10 billion of headroom. And of course, it's turned out to be a 30 billion swing, which is why she's got to raise a minimum of 30 billion pounds of taxes. So you could criticize her for being reckless in that sense. But even if you can criticize her for not, which I think is reasonable, and we have done this, for not doing enough yet to get growth going in the economy. Even if you can criticize her for saying that the way that she raised taxes in the last budget, the increase in employers' national insurance, fights against growth, depresses investment. And that, so that was a bad policy. Nonetheless, she is not to blame for the low growth in productivity. That is a problem that goes back years. And to be clear, it was not fixed by the last Tory government. And so if we're attributing blame for the mess we're in, more of it goes to the last Tory government than is attributable to her, though I fear that the Tories won't give her the benefit of the doubt. Nigel Farage won't give her the benefit of the doubt. And to go back to our earlier conversation, I suspect British people will just say, oh, heavens, I don't like the fact my taxes are going up 30 billion. And they may well end up blaming her, even if, truthfully, that's not fair.
Well, whoever's to blame, whatever is to blame, is irrelevant, really, to what comes next, because, the next thing is, how are we going to get out of this mess? And I know we're going to talk about that in the next episode, aren't we, with Ruth Curtis, who's from the Resolution Foundation, was the job of Torsten Bell before he became a Labour MP, running the Resolution Foundation. Ruth's now doing the job, and they've got some ideas of how to fill this black hole. So we will cover that in the next episode. But that's it from us for now. Bye-bye.
All the best. Goodbye.